This is The Final Word. It is Season 17, Episode 15, the weekly edition of The Final Word that we're squeezing in before a test match at the Gabba. We've got a day to do it, but there is a wider world of cricket than just the Australia-India series that we are aware of. Jeff Lemon and Bharat Sundaresan with you as Adam prepares for The Final Word live show. There's a slight chance you might hear this if you're really onto it before the live show in Brisbane starts, really? Which would be tonight in real time, in recording time. Quite something. Bharat and I are sitting here like we're cramped in the front seat of we're using one microphone just to let you behind the curtain. So we're sitting up like in the bench seat of the van up the front, next to whichever parent is driving. And we're squeezed in here like this, so you can enjoy that if you want to find the video version.
Or like we're in one of those tinier tuk-tuks you find in some cities in India.
That is true. I've been in a lot of tuk-tuks with you and me and one other large person, which has been a bunch of different large people. That is correct, yeah. They don't necessarily make the back of the tuk-tuk for the 6 foot plus Australian gentleman of European origin.
No, it's made for the Indian origin, South Asian origin, tall men.
Sure.
I'm tall in India, as you know.
You're a big guy in India. You're big in India. You're big in Adelaide. You're big in a lot of places. The show's brought to you by Maurice Blackburn, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. They look out for working people who need legal assistance, and we love having them involved. And CBUS Super, who look after people in retirement. We're all about the workers on this show. United, they shall never be defeated. Brisbane, we probably shouldn't talk about Brisbane too much or Australia-India too much, because there'll be a preview show tomorrow and there'll be daily shows, and you've heard about all of that. And if you've been listening to the daily shows from New Zealand with Cam Ponsonby and Jeremy Coney, they've been a hit. People are loving the Cam Coney, the C&C Music Factory partnership. So we don't really need to talk about that series either, because they're doing that comprehensively enough. Just the one thing I will say is that I believe that Green Demon has been used. I believe the phrases have been used about the pitch here because it's got some grass on it. Yeah. I'm pretty confident it'll be fine. I don't think we're going to see a South Africa
chance.
Australia test from a couple of years ago. But we should get into some World Test Championship calculations, and that does start with England and New Zealand.
No, before that, I just want to say, just before we pressed record, I was just going through the CricBuzz app. I have to give them a plug on and off. I should, don't I?
If you plugged everybody that you work for, we wouldn't have a show.
Well, fair enough. I have been putting myself out there, to say the least. The Champions Trophy. We haven't spoken much about the Champions Trophy. It's apparently still in limbo. A week ago, I thought it was all settled and we had the hybrid mode.
Oh, have we gone back to limbo?
No, we're back to limbo. Okay. Baby, it's in past time. So there's Pakistan and the PCB, the BCCI and the ICC are still trying to wrangle something out. I think it's not so much from what I read about this particular Champions Trophy. Right. It's about what the PCB wants for the future, where they want a similar model that they get where they don't have to go to India whenever there's an ICC tournament in India. So it all is up in the air. And here we thought we knew it all. So I just thought I should throw it in there before we get into...
That's quite an interesting flex, though, to be like, okay, fine, we'll do the hybrid model, but that means we're doing the hybrid model for all of the ones upcoming in India, yeah? Right? That seems totally reasonable. I mean, that would be the bargaining tactic. And, I mean, it's hard to make a strong argument against it, aside from the fact that Pakistan have toured India without problem several times, which kind of underlines that maybe that could happen in either direction. But I'm sure we will be told by a bunch of people that we're wrong and we're idiots and we're ignorant. And
that we will be anyway. True. I mean, people will have problem with your hair, my hair, what we wear. But that's just the nature of people.
Well, that is the nature of people. Some people hate Tasmania, And
that is correct.
They will hate my Tasmania Devils jumper because I'm a foundation member of a club that doesn't exist yet, but
it will be that.
Let's make it happen. Go the Apple Isle. Tune in 2028. When we'll probably do like a live season launch event or something. Knowing us, we're not allowed to talk about Australian rules football on this show. People have made that very clear. It's about cricket, and sure, Australian rules football was invented by cricketers and is played on cricket grounds, but
yes, indeed,
we still can't talk about it. So the World Test Championship, New Zealand England. Now, I don't know if I had my numbers wrong. I probably did when I was trying to find a way where there might be a slight tiny possibility that England could qualify just out of academic interest. But that door is closed. Even though they've won the 2 tests, they've had another points deduction, yet another slow over rate deduction. So if they weren't completely out before, they are completely out now. New Zealand are completely out because they've lost 2. Doesn't matter if they win the 3rd one. So it's 2 teams eliminated. South Africa, on the other hand, 1 foot in the final already. They're at 0.61 on their percentage, or they will be if they win 1 against Pakistan. So they beat Sri Lanka 2-0. Sri Lanka were better in the second test, better showing. Bowled out South Africa for 358 and then made 328, so it was a decent enough first innings. Ryan Rickleton made 100. Kyle Verreynne made 100. I like Verreynne. I liked him in Australia. Had ticker.
He did.
Made runs here.
He did. Nobody else could. Yeah, he looked very good.
The absolute shit tip out here. He made 64 or something like that. And Travis Head made the 90, and they were the only players to get over 50 in that game. He made 100. And then Pathum Nissanka in reply made 89. There were lots of 40s in that Sri Lanka innings. Lahiru Kumara, I was glad to see him take 4 for because he just gets injured all the time. He wangs it down there. Like he's got pace. He's got unsophisticated pace sometimes, and he gets clobbered. But he took 4 for on a pitch that suited him at Ebeja. If we can get the different plosives and consonants right. Dane Patterson took 5 for the South Africans, and then presumably the pitch started to take turn more because Pravith Jayasuriya took 5 for, although he conceded over 100 to do it. South Africa made 317 with a bunch of sort of 40s and 50s kind of scores. Bavuma 66 after making 78, important runs for the captain, and then Sri Lanka unsurprisingly couldn't chase 348. Keshav Maharaj with the dollar sign takes 5 in the last inning. So South Africa win. You get a bit more confidence out of it as Sri Lanka. At least you competed in that test match after getting annihilated in the first one, bowled out for 42, wasn't it? Anyway, but South Africa won 2. They've got 2 tests against Pakistan to come, and if they win one of them, they're guaranteed a spot, basically.
They are, and they look the favourites to get to be the first team to qualify for that WTC final, because Australia still have to play Sri Lanka. Obviously, India have a great chance of doing that as well. If they win by, I was looking it up, if they win 4-1 or 3-1, they get a direct entry into the World Test Championship final. If Australia win, they still have a chance, India, but Australia have those 2 extra test matches that they can play, or they will play in Sri Lanka. But I was just thinking about South Africa. If they do become the first team to qualify,
after that embarrassment in New Zealand.
Exactly. What do you make of that embarrassment, right? If South Africa still make it despite having rested all their key players because of the SAT20 just 12 months prior, or less than 12 months prior, and they still are able to make the final. It makes for an interesting argument, right? Like, so will that be the future? I mean, could it work in the future as well? Because from now on, every time there is a test series South Africa play, if there is one scheduled in that January-February period, they will not be able to send their key players to anywhere. I mean, if it is, and let's think of what tours they could do at that time of the year. Either has to be in the subcontinent or West Indies. Or New Zealand, really. So, yeah, I mean, it is interesting. It'll be quite a story, South Africa making the WTC final after they had all those players who not a lot of people had heard of playing in that series.
And fundamentally, do you deserve to make a World Test Championship
final
if
true
you
as well,
don't take your Test cricket seriously enough to send something even close to your best team? But because they play short series, they were able to lose that one and then win enough of their other 2 Test series that their percentage is in robust shape now that they basically haven't lost since. So, yeah, in terms of working out what would happen from there, I was doing some hurting my head with a spreadsheet earlier. So if South Africa do make it, assuming they beat Pakistan at least once in home conditions, which they should do on balance of probabilities, unless it just rains Pakistan, a whole lot.
Or if it's Pakistan, do what Pakistan
do. Pakistan, you never know at this point. You know, Jason Gillespie's fired up. We'll come to that later in the show where Jason is with the PCB. So if South Africa make it, there's one spot left for Australia or India in theory, although Sri Lanka could, in theory, still make it by beating Australia 2-0 if Australia don't do well enough and if India don't beat Australia by enough. So there's a balancing act to be made here. So basically, if India either won the next 3 or won 2 and drew 1, they would make Australia. They would make their own position Sri Lanka proof.
Yeah.
They would ensure that Australia couldn't get past them even with a 2-0 win in Sri Lanka. That's the only. So India could knock Australia out directly in this series if they won 2 and drew 1 or won 3, right? Which is probably unlikely, and draws generally unlikely. But rain, Sydney, Melbourne has been known to happen, right? So you can't you can say that the rate that the game is played at means there won't be draws, but you can also just lose 2 days to rain at some point, and that could happen. So if they did that, they could knock Australia out straight away. If Australia lost both their tests in Sri Lanka, then India could still get through by winning only one of the next 3 test matches. So that's, which obviously they wouldn't know until afterwards. They'd finish this series and then have to wait for the next results. But basically, if they can keep Australia to no more than 1 win from the next 3 tests, so either India win the next 3 2-1, or they win 1 and draw 2, or they have 3 draws, or they have 1 win, a draw, and a loss. Any of those configurations leave it open that they could still go past Australia or stay ahead of Australia if Australia lose 2-0 in Sri Lanka, which is also not impossible because Australia often goes to Sri Lanka and falls in a heap like we saw in the first test at Galle last time. So all these options are still live. And even if South Africa lose both their Pakistan tests, they'd be on 0.53, which could still be enough to make it. I think it would. I mean, Sri Lanka could win twice and go slightly ahead of that. I couldn't quite find a way where they could stay ahead of both India and Australia, though, because that gets a little too complicated. So I don't. But there almost is. Like there are. It's like if there were 3 draws or something like that, then if you squinted, you might be able to find a way to make that happen. Or 3 draws and then Australia lost 2 against Sri Lanka, something like that. Lots of options still on the table. I am fairly confused by it by now, but I've got a lot of stuff in the spreadsheet.
What I've learned from the last 5-7 minutes, apart from all the permutations and combinations of the WTC is, and I've always kind of known this, you have such a soothing voice, but I've never sat this close to you and like had your voice in my ear. I think I'm going to record stuff that you say, not the podcast so much, and use it at night just to fall asleep. Yeah. I think it's always been soothing, but we've always like stood next to each other, or we've sat across each other. We've never sat this close.
You haven't had it in your ear.
Yeah, like in 1 year, especially the year when I don't hear too well. But what I did pick up from all of that, apart from the fact that I want to go to bed with their voice in my ear, is and I was thinking about if Sri Lanka have even a glimmer of a chance that they can go through by beating Australia, those test matches in Galle won't last for more than a session. Maybe a session into day 2 will be. You know how it works in Galle. We saw it last time when Australia were there, the first test, but then they made the second pitch for the second is slightly more batter friendly, but I can't see that happen if they have a chance.
This could be fun though. It could be highly entertaining if you got Prabhat Jayasuriya, where he's already taken about 250 test wickets just at Galle. He takes his 5 much more economically than he did in South Africa. He's played almost all of his test cricket at Galle. It's 4 or 5 tests he's played somewhere else, and the rest of his profile is just Galle. It's like a series of Asterix comics. Anyway, he would be there just toiling away from one end, game done in a day and a half. I mean, it'd be funny. It'd be obviously there would be a stink kicked up if this is the case.
It would be, but
if there is a path, if there is a way through, I would love that. I'd love to come down to the last match with something still riding on it, and that is the extra interest that the WTC brings. Even though some persons, some of whom are captaining other international teams, think that it's bullshit and they don't care about it and they're not paying any attention and they never liked it anyway. Don't want it. Don't even want don't want silverware. We're not in the game to win things. We're just there is that extra bit of interest.
Very much so. And I think there will be some sizzle. I really look forward to that Sri Lanka series because whatever happens here, maybe Sri Lanka can do Australia a favor. Can do either Australia or Australia so much because they're playing against Australia. They could do their wonderful neighbours India a favor by beating Australia 2-0. So there's so much happening. I don't think it will be decided.
A 9 ODI series to be announced.
Like across both countries.
So that's all the stuff happening in the WTC. I think we're duty bound to touch on the Dave Warner Glenn Maxwell story a little bit, which isn't something I want to do much. So I don't want to get to a stage where every time David Warner says something, it gets written up into a bunch of headlines and everybody gets in a kerfuffle about it because he said something that may not be particularly measured or may not be phrased as carefully as it could be or something like that. And then you get all the absurd headlines. Aussie legend, slams, whoever, which is it is bullshit. And I know we're getting sucked into it a little bit. And I know it will happen for probably at least 2 summers while he's doing commentary. But just on the specifics of this one, I felt like on this show we should address it. So the criticism, and he would have been asked the question and been led into it. It's not like Warner's gone in there looking to bash up Glenn Maxwell, but he's been asked about Maxwell trying to qualify, trying to get picked in that squad to go to Sri Lanka, and said that he shouldn't be eligible because he hasn't been playing enough red ball cricket. Always up for a quote, David Warner. But the line that didn't make any sense was questioning the commitment, as in like he's not committed enough to play red ball cricket. The thing, like, I think anyone who listens to this show, and we've seen a lot of pretty uninformed stuff, responses online and so on, but people who listen to this show will generally know there are 2 things going on here. 2 like reasons that Glenn Maxwell's not played a lot of first-class red ball cricket over the last few years. One is that he and Warner are both in the white ball teams, or were picked for every match when they were available, basically, in Australia's white ball teams that always play over the part of the season where the Shield is played. 2 is that Maxwell's been blocked by Cricket Australia repeatedly over years from playing red ball cricket. He's tried to make himself available a bunch of times. He's been pulled out of games. He's been taken out of that entire season that he had lined up in England. He's been pulled out of matches even this season, I believe, where he wanted to be available and was told that he couldn't and shouldn't be available. So put all of that together, and there have been a bunch of times he's wanted to play but hasn't been able to, and then there have been other times that he's injured, like this season where he's currently got a hamstring problem. So he's not declining to play first-class cricket. He really wants to play first-class cricket. It just hasn't been able to happen.
I mean, if you read Glenn Maxwell's book, the one overriding sentiment you get from it is how much he's loved the idea of him playing Test cricket, and how much he's, I wouldn't say regretted, but to an extent there is a bit of regret in the fact that he hasn't played a lot of Test cricket, or the amount of Test cricket that he really wanted to, and the fact that he still wants to play Test cricket. But I will say this about whatever David Warner says. I personally don't mind his commentary at all, because you finally have someone who's ready to make statements, and someone who is in the know, who was part of this team, who understands Australian cricket, who understands world cricket. But there is some logic to what he's saying. And look, the words may be like in a commitment and those things you can like pull out and say, hey, he's completely wrong. But there's always some logic to most things he's said so far as a commentator but then it's about, who he says it about, and what their perceived relationship is that Warner has shared with that particular player, and how you read into it. Because similar things were said about Adam Zampa as well, right? And as someone who watches a lot of Sheffield Shield cricket and speaks to a lot of Sheffield Shield cricketers, I mean, there is that sentiment from some saying, hey, not just about Maxwell, but okay, we've been slogging our butts off for the last few summers. So can an Adam Zampa just come and play a game and think just by impressing in one game can he get picked? I think it's similar with Glenn Maxwell as well. And then the question to be asked is, all right, is there nobody else in Australia right now who can do what Glenn Maxwell does in a Test match? I mean, could you look at someone like Matt Short, who's been playing first-class cricket quite regularly, because he's been looked at as the next opener or next top order T20 batter. So can he do what Glenn Maxwell does, like bash a quick 60, bowl fastest off spin? So I think it's not completely illogical what David Warner is saying, but I know what you're saying. Like with the Glenn Maxwell story in isolation, it's not that he's not wanted to do it. It's not that he's turned his back on first-class cricket, and every time he thinks there is a Test opportunity, he's like, no, give it to me. So Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And it's going to happen more and more with David Warner because he is outspoken. He's going to come out and say things. And how it gets blown up and how it gets, then torn apart and put into headlines, we all have to be careful with how we react to that.
Yeah, because it's such an easy sugar hit for news producers to put that in the headline. You'll get some clicks. People will talk about it, and off you go, and we're talking about it now. But the other side of that is, I was going to say Warner's not a professional communicator, but he is now a professional communicator. So he has to recognise that your language choice, your vocabulary choice is important at times like that. Your tone's important at times like that. And when you're talking about first-class cricket, I made the observation yesterday that Warner played 22 Sheffield Shield games in his career. And yes, he played 100 Test matches, and he was in the Test side early, but he was in the Test side off the back of 8 Shield matches. He'd only played 8 Shield games when he got picked. So he was picked as a smoky. Obviously as a very young player, and Maxwell's a much older player, and so there is the reasonable position to come to say, well, he's had his time. You can't go picking an older guy who's barely played in the last few years. But I think sort of what selection of Test cricket has shown us from some of the things that have come off for other teams is that you can pick players based on knowing what they can do and feeling like they can. Yeah,
very much so.
And surely if the criticism is someone's 35 or 36, if they're that age, surely they've played enough to be able to adapt if they need to adapt.
And the fact that Maxwell, just 2.5 years ago, was brought into the Sri Lankan or the Test squad for Sri Lanka on the basis of how well he was batting there and what the Australian selectors thought the pitches would play like in Galle, and they did play like that. So there is precedence to it. It's not, and which is why I think the Glenn Maxwell case, we have to take it case by case, right? I think that's where we all have to be careful with how we react to. And I guess it would be similar with some of the things that someone like Michael Vaughan says as well. He does. Whenever you have people like them, former cricketers, are outspoken in the media, it's always important to put things into context and then break it down like we are here.
Right. So anyway, that's broadly the outline of that, which I reckon that 95% of the people listening to this show would know about instead.